You better put your thinking caps on for this one. We got a lot of thinking to do. Let's get into it. I just finished rebuilding both of the hubs on the front axle, redoing the brakes, wheel bearings, rotors, that whole deal, new U-joints, and the axles. But first, I want to highlight the condition of the components of the drivetrain. The transmission seems to be rebuilt. It has a very new front and rear main seal. Someone also spray painted it green for some reason. You know, don't ask me. It seemed to shift fine when I drove it, so nothing in it seems terribly wrong. We're going to drain the fluid out of it and check it then, but we're hoping that the transmission is okay. Now, here's the front axle. It's a Dana 44, low pinion, and hopefully you can tell that. Hopefully you can see that, hopefully. Well, anyway, this hole is pretty wore out. The pinion bearings, I assume, are shot in here, and I assume the seal also is shot. Like half a cup of fluid came out of it when I took the case off, or the pan off the front. Now, at the time, I thought this had a part-time NP205 transfer case, and I figured we'd only ever use the four-wheel drive in very specific circumstances, and we wouldn't use it very often, so I didn't think that I would need to have to rebuild this part of the driveline. So I just did everything else, and I did not touch the pinion or the ring gear or any of that in there. So I did not replace the seals either. So should I have? Probably. And knowing what I know now, also probably. So let's look at the transfer case. So here's our transfer case. Now, I did not know hardly anything about these four-wheel drive trucks. When we got this truck, I did a quick Google search on the transfer case that Ford used on these high boys, and it said that they were NP205s, part-time transfer case, and I figured that's what this thing had. But as the keen observer would probably see right now, it is not an NP205. This is an NP203 full-time transfer case. It's chain driven and it's dual range. What does that mean? Well, that means that whenever this yoke is turned, the input of the transfer case is turned by the transmission and the engine. There's a differential in here that chooses between the front or the rear to send the power. The place of least resistance, the side that has least resistance, will get the power. So that means the front axle will be driven a lot more than I originally anticipated, which is okay if it was rebuilt. This is also part of the problem with the 203. This is all the oil that came out of it. It should have 4.5 quarts based on what I've just been reading about. So the chain is still here. It's a little sloppy, but I mean, it's really not that bad. There was some oily, shiny goo at the bottom that I kind of cleaned out already, but overall, taking this piece off, I kind of can see in there and it looks okay. The main problem with this is no matter how we shift the lever, it does not engage. We can't get this front yoke to spin for the drive shaft. The transfer case should have a lock mode on it where it locks the center differential and sends power to both the front and the rear. And no matter how we shift the lever, we can't get it to go into lock. So something we think is broken in it. On my drive home through the field, I noticed a very distinctive drivetrain clunk. There's a differential in here somewhere, and supposedly things in that can break. So we're probably going to take this off and check it out and probably rebuild it. Let's look at our last piece of our drivetrain. That is a Dana 60. The rear axle there, it's in really, really good shape. I really don't have any problems with it at all. The yoke and everything just feels real good. Lash feels just about right. It was full of fluid, so I did not do anything with it either. New wheel bearings, of course, but I did not do anything with this axle. It seemed to be fine, so we can always service it in the future, but for now, I don't think anything is particularly wrong with it. So what's the big deal? Why am I making such a big deal about all of this? Well, we have to decide how we're going to go about fixing it so we can drive it. The most important objective to this truck is to get it back on the road and get it drivable reliably. Luke's going to shoot me now. Ah! Luke just 3D printed a gun.
Musket.
A musket, a flintlock. Pistol.
Yeah.
Yep.
Put that in there. Tuck it back.
Little pop-it thing, you know? And it's got a rubber band in it that brings the hammer down on top of it. And
you can see it's all crusty.
Very cool. All right, back to the show. So let's evaluate what we got and what we need to probably fix. So first and foremost, transfer case, obviously something wrong with it. So we're going to pull the transfer case down out of the truck and probably take it apart and rebuild it. One, it was full of lots of metal pieces and small stuff that is probably not good, and it made some funky sounds. And it doesn't sound very good whenever you turn it. And again, it should turn the front drive shaft in some position, and it just does not. So something's jammed up, something's in a bind, something's broken inside the transfer case. So how do we go about rebuilding the transfer case? Well, like I said, the NP203 is a full-time transfer case. So it'll spin the front drive shaft and the rear drive shaft a lot of the times. You know, it goes back and forth, but it will do that full-time, right? Which puts a lot of wear and tear on your front axle, something that maybe we don't necessarily want. This truck will mainly just see cruising around and two-wheel drive duty most of its life. Only occasionally will we need to engage four-wheel drive, so really a part-time transfer case would make a lot more sense for our application. I've read where having a full-time transfer case not only wears out the front axle, but it also can zap a little bit of fuel economy. Not that that's a big deal, because it's a ginormous, you know, almost 6,000 pound truck with a big block, so it's not going to get good gas mileage anyway. But does having a full-time transfer case all the time justify the maybe less fuel economy and the more wear and tear it puts on the front axle? I don't know. So you can rebuild the NP203 with a kit that turns it into a part-time transfer case. It gets rid of the center differential, then you can use two-wheel drive high, low, and then by pushing the lock in on the basically would turn the NP203 into a gear-driven or a chain-driven 205. It's not the same, but you can think about it that way. So what we got? We got 203. So I need your guys' help. What do you guys think? This truck came from the factory, assumedly, with a 203, so it's kind of cool, kind of rare maybe. I don't really know. But it is a full-time truck, which is kind of cool. You know, to me, that's kind of cool. Do we rebuild it as a part-time or full-time? If we rebuild it full-time, we're going to have to address the front axle soon, like now. We'd have to take the axles back out, pull this intersection out, redo the pinion. There was also metal sludge in the front diff, so there's a good chance that the gears themselves could be wore out. I hope they don't. I hope they're not. And, you know, they probably aren't, but something obviously wore pretty good in there by the amount of metal sludge that was in the bottom of that. So if we do rebuild the 203 full-time, we're going to have to do something about the front axle and fix it probably. If we rebuild the 203 part-time, we wouldn't necessarily have to fix the front axle now. I think it would probably be fine for a long time. We'd probably have to fix it eventually because it does, like I said, it has quite a bit of slop in the front and it'll wear out, you know, eventually. But if we don't use four-wheel drive that often, we're not really going to be wearing it down too much. So, do we rebuild the 203 full-time or do we rebuild the 203 part-time? Once we dive into the 203 and see what's wrong with it, you know, if it does have something broken in the center differential, maybe we're going to have to rebuild it part-time. If it'd be cheaper to get the parts to rebuild it as a part-time transfer case rather than a full-time. I think a full-time transfer case is kind of cool. It's kind of rare. You know, you're not going to see it a whole lot. Typically, you think of trucks like that, you think of a part-time four-wheel drive, not full-time. So there's definitely pluses and minuses to both. I really want your guys' opinion on this. I don't know which way to go, particularly. It doesn't matter to me either way. I will put in the work, you know, to fix it, however we need to fix it, but I'm just trying to decide what the best route to go at this moment in time. Again, this will be a mainly just street-driven truck. It'll just perform light-duty things. maybe pull our camper once to a local campground just 10 minutes away from here. So it'll never be put to work like it used to be put to work, I don't think. So I'm looking for you guys' help, your guys' input on this. I don't really know which way to go. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time on It'll Run.